They traveled across galaxies, defied death on screen, and made us believe in a brighter tomorrow. But their real-life demise was anything but science fiction. Illness, addiction, loneliness, and death were predictable. These are the haunting stories of stars who left us too soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's explore. Leonard Nimoy as Spock. Leonard Nimoy was 35 when he played Mr. Spock in the first Star Trek series. Stoic, logical, and hyper, Spock became a cultural phenomenon. But behind his restrained facade, Leonard Nimoy was slowly falling apart. Born March 26, 1931 in Boston, Massachusetts, Nimoy struggled to escape poverty, working odd jobs while pursuing small acting roles. But none of them could prepare him for the quiet demise that followed the success of Spock. By the early 1970s, Nimoy was a prisoner of his own creation, trapped by fan expectations, ridiculed in casting rooms, and unable to find work outside the shadow of Vulcan ears. After that incident, his marriage of more than 30 years fell apart. He drank heavily, sometimes secretly, sometimes openly, and his children watched as their father gradually became unrecognizable. In 1987, during the filming of Star Trek IV, Nimoy found himself alone in a trailer with a letter from his son, Adam, who was then 21. "I don't know who you are anymore." He didn't answer. Instead, he downed another shot of vodka, dulled the pain, and returned to the set as if nothing had happened. That night, he collapsed. No hospitalization, no follow-up, just a quiet, bitter recovery and a phone call the next morning. He eventually quit drinking in the 1990s, but the damage was already done. His lungs were damaged. His family relationships were broken. Later, in interviews, he admitted that he had no memory of his children's entire lives. "I was there, but I wasn't with them," he said. Leonard Nimoy died on February 27, 2015, at the age of 83, of end-stage chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the result of decades of chain smoking during the years he most wanted to forget. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $45 million, but all the money and fame couldn't make up for the long nights of longing or the son he almost lost. DeForest Kelley as Dr. Leonard McCoy. DeForest Kelley was 46 when he played Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy on Star Trek, the gruff but humane chief physician of the ship. His wit and weary compassion were iconic, but the man behind the character bore wounds that never fully healed. Born January 20th, 1920 in Toccoa, Georgia, Kelley spent his formative years trapped in B-movie hell, almost always cast as the villain. He had seen himself die dozens of times on screen while barely scraping by in real life. Between roles, he worked odd jobs, swallowed his pride, and waited for something bigger, something more real. When Star Trek came along, it was both a salvation and a trap. His subsequent fame was narrow and confined. He was beloved, yes, but only as McCoy. The roles dried up, the scripts stopped coming. Hollywood gave him a label, and that label stuck with him for the rest of his life. In his final years, Kelley fought a painful battle with stomach cancer. The pain was constant, but his condition gradually weakened. He never complained publicly, but those close to him said his body broke down before his spirit did. He read old fan letters in the hospital, each one a reminder that even though Hollywood had framed him, audiences never stopped loving him. DeForest Kelley died on June 11, 1999, at the age of 79, from complications of stomach cancer. He left behind a legacy and a net worth of $5 million, modest by industry standards, but his true wealth lay in the hearts he touched. They call him Bones, but it's the soul that remains. James Doohan as Montgomery Scotty Scott. James Doohan was 46 when he played Montgomery Scotty Scott on Star Trek, the earnest, miracle-working chief engineer who kept the company running with sheer grit and genius. His thick Scottish accent, steady hands, and the iconic line, "I gave her everything she's got, Captain," made him beloved around the world. But those hands held a truth that no fan had ever seen. Born on March 3, 1920, in Vancouver, Canada, Doohan's path to fame was paved in war. On D-Day, he charged onto Juno Beach under enemy fire, leading his men through a minefield before being shot 6 times by friendly fire that night. A bullet had shattered the middle finger of his right hand. From that day on, every performance was an illusion. The camera angles, the gloves, the prosthetics, all designed to hide what war had taken. Most fans never noticed, but he did every day. The physical trauma was just the beginning. Behind his calm, on-screen demeanor, Doohan struggled with post-war nightmares that never faded. After Star Trek, he was stuck in a rut. 2 failed marriages drained him financially. Raising 7 children sent him to countless conventions, fan events, and voiceover work, grateful for the love but exhausted by the work. In the end, it was Alzheimer's that took the most out of his life. Bit by bit, the Enterprise engineer lost track of his ship, its programs, and his crew. There were quiet moments when he didn't recognize old friends, and painful moments when he didn't recognize himself. James Doohan died on July 20, 2005, at the age of 85, from complications from pneumonia and Alzheimer's. His ashes were partially launched into space in 2008, marking the final interstellar journey he had dreamed of taking. At the time of his death, his net worth was $7 million. But no amount of numbers can measure his courage or his legacy. Nichelle Nichols as Nyota Uhura. Nichelle Nichols was 34 when she played Lieutenant Nyota Uhura on Star Trek, the calm, commanding voice of the Enterprise, and one of the first black women on American television to be portrayed as more than a servant. She represented dignity, progress, possibility, but her real life was quietly falling apart behind that shiny uniform. Born December 28, 1932, in Chicago, Illinois, Nichols entered Hollywood with enthusiasm and talent, only to have the door slammed in her face. While Uhura broke barriers, Nichols was still offered maids and supporting roles. After Star Trek, the offers went nowhere. She faced 2 failed marriages, persistent health problems, and an industry that celebrated her legacy, but rarely gave her work. By the 2010s, Nichols's health began to fail. A stroke in 2015 signaled the beginning of a long decline. Dementia began to take its toll on her, slowly robbing her of her memory, her speech, and her independence. Then a legal battle broke out, with her son and former partners fighting for control of her assets. Accusations of elder abuse, financial manipulation, and isolation arose. Nichols, once a beacon of strength, found herself in the midst of a nightmare she couldn't even name. Nichelle Nichols died of heart failure on July 30, 2022, in Silver City, New Mexico, at the age of 89. Only a few trusted loved ones were present. Her net worth at the time was estimated at $8 million, earned not only through acting, but also through endurance. The woman who once spoke for the stars left a legacy both historic and tarnished by betrayal. Michelle Barrett as Christine Chappell and computer voice. Michelle Barrett was 34 years old when she joined Star Trek in 1966 as Nurse Christine Chappell. Fans know her as a gentle nurse, but they hear her everywhere as the omnipresent voice of the Enterprise computer. To millions, she is the voice of the future. But behind that voice is a woman struggling to be seen for who she is. Born February 23, 1932, in Cleveland, Ohio, Barrett was more than just Gene Roddenberry's wife. She was his editor, his protector, his final voice for his ideas when no one else would listen. But in his final years, as Roddenberry's mind began to fail from the effects of a series of strokes and an undiagnosed neurodegenerative condition, it was Mahel who held it all together, writing notes, retyping pages, hiding his confusion from his producers. One day in 1990, during pre-production on a Star Trek project, she found him locked in a hotel bathroom, crying hysterically, not recognizing the script in his hands. He asked her who had written it. It was his own script. She lied and said she was a new writer. He smiled and said, "Pretty good." From that moment on, Barrett was no longer a wife but a silent nurse, a secret caretaker. She canceled her voiceovers to care for him, hid his illness from the studio, and fought through the exhaustion, knowing that if the truth were revealed, everything they had built could go up in smoke. Hollywood doesn't want its visionaries to die. It wants them to be great. When he died in 1991, she did not mourn him publicly. She returned to work immediately, but by then, her health had deteriorated with frequent fatigue and brittle bones, which were later diagnosed as early symptoms of leukemia. She never spoke of the night she found Jean unconscious in bed, or of cleaning the blood from her pillow before calling 911. Those memories remained with her, even as her body began to fail. Mahel Barrett died on December 18, 2008, at the age of 76, after a quiet battle with leukemia. Her ashes were sent into space alongside Jean, as she had promised him years earlier. At the time of her death, her net worth was estimated at $10 million, amassed through decades of work, loyalty, and sacrifice that few actually witnessed. Ricardo Montalban as Khan Noonien Singh. Ricardo Montalban was 46 when he first appeared as Khan Noonien Singh in the original Star Trek series, a genetically enhanced superhuman with sculpted strength and imposing presence. But on set, after every punchy line and proud stand, he would return to his trailer, collapse to the floor, and sob silently into a towel. Born November 25, 1920 in Mexico City, Montalban was seriously injured while horseback riding during a filming assignment in the early 1950s. A fall crushed 2 vertebrae and permanently damaged his lower spine. For decades, he hid his pain behind a calm exterior as he returned to the role of Khan in Star Trek II. As Khan's rage grew at age 61, the pain became more intense. He refused to use a body double. He refused special props. His chest, realistic and rigid, became a visual legend, while just below his vertebrae gradually degenerated. There were days when he could barely walk. Crew members whispered as he lay curled up on the floor between takes, clutching his sides, unable to breathe from the throbbing pain. He wore braces hidden under his costume and took painkillers, but the pain persisted. Yet every time the camera panned, he stood tall, eyes blazing, voice firm. Khan never faltered. Deep down, he once said, "The hardest thing was not the pain, but knowing he had to endure it to continue working in an industry that was not well suited to men like him." As a Mexican actor in Hollywood, he fought double for half the roles, and he fought for others, founding the Nosotros Foundation to break down the doors that were always slammed in his face. By the late 1990s, he was in a wheelchair. His spine was fused in several places. Acting became rare. The pain lingered. But he still smiled at conventions. He still signed autographs. He still sat stoically, because Khan never bowed. Ricardo Montalban died on January 14, 2009, at the age of 88, of congestive heart failure. He died at his home in Los Angeles. His net worth was estimated at $10 million, but no number can measure the cost of a life lived in suffering, or the legacy of a man who endured it with unshakable dignity. Mark Leonard as Sarak. Mark Leonard was 42 when he first appeared as Sarak, the Vulcan ambassador and Spock's father, calm, collected, a pillar of logic amidst the chaos of the galaxy. But while Sarak stood tall among the stars, the man behind the character was quietly weeping behind the scenes. Born October 15, 1924, Leonard built his career on quiet strength. He played Romulans, Klingons, and finally the role that defined him, Sarak. But even at the height of the Star Trek cultural boom, he was barely a household name. He sat in on conventions, sometimes overlooked by fans who were trying to get autographs from more famous cast members. In between appearances, he returned to guest roles and off-Broadway gigs, struggling with the bitter truth that Sarak's prestige didn't translate into a steady paycheck. The darkest moment came in the late 1980s, when his health took a turn for the worse. A suspected cancer diagnosis loomed, but Leonard, who had no insurance at the time, postponed treatment to avoid hospital bills. For months, he performed on stage in pain, even vomiting between acts in a grueling production of King Lear. He refused to stop, fearing that an absence from work would mean a complete disappearance. As his condition worsened, he gradually withdrew from public view. A familiar sight at science fiction conventions, he became a rare sight, talked about by his loyal fans. By the early 1990s, he had stopped taking calls from his former co-stars. When he finally appeared as Sarak in Star Trek: The Next Generation, he was dying, his eyes glazed over, his voice weak, his hands shaking just off-screen. Mark Leonard died on November 27, 1996, at the age of 72. His death came quietly, without much media fanfare. His estimated net worth was around $3 million, which does not reflect his legacy. Ultimately, the man who brought Sarak to the universe passed away without any spotlight, leaving only silence, perhaps fitting for a man who chose dignity as his final act. René Auberginois Chongvai Odo. René Auberginois was 52 when he joined Star Trek. Deep Space Nine in 1993 as Odo, a shapeshifter who yearned to understand humanity but never truly belonged. Underneath his rubber shell and loneliness, René poured decades of silent pain into the role. Born June 1, 1940 in New York City, René spent his life pursuing meaning through art. He was disciplined, reserved, and never overdoing it. But for months, he ignored the signs of shortness of breath and wheezing that he blamed on aging. Then that morning, in the garden, he reached for the trowel but fell to his knees, his vision blurred, his ribs aching. When he looked down, his hands were red. He forced a smile and said loudly, "You're exaggerating." But he knew. A scan a few days later confirmed it. Terminal lung cancer, inoperable, fast. Finally. He didn't speak to anyone for weeks, not even Judith. He rehearsed the words, but couldn't get them out. Instead, he kept acting, kept recording audiobooks, kept answering fan mail as if everything was fine. Until one night, while recording a voice at home, he passed out in the middle of a recording. Judith found him lying on the floor, the microphone still working. That's when the silence was broken. From then on, everything was a matter of timing. He planned his death like a concert. The music was chosen, the photos were chosen, the script was annotated for donation. Friends were invited to say goodbye but not given any advance notice. He didn't want pity, he just wanted presence. The slideshow he made, featuring Beatles songs, played on a loop on a dim projector as he sank into a coma, his lungs failing, his breath coming in and out. René Auberginois died on December 8, 2019, at the age of 79, of terminal lung cancer at his home in California. His death was medically assisted under California law. His net worth at the time was estimated at $5 million. But nothing he possessed was more meaningful than the dignity he regained in a single scene that no one else could have written for him. William Shatner as Captain James T. Kirk. William Shatner was 35 when he became Captain James T. Kirk in Star Trek. Bold, determined, the face of a new land. But decades later, it wasn't the Enterprise that nearly brought him down. That was the night he found his wife, Noreen Kidd, lifeless at the bottom of the swimming pool, her body still warm, her wedding ring glinting in the porch light, as if begging him to break the moment. Born March 22, 1931 in Montreal, Canada, Shatner rose to stardom with drive, charm, and a relentless drive to shatter marriages, friendships, and silences. He married Noreen in 1997. Despite warnings from friends about her battle with addiction, still, he loved her, passionately, perhaps recklessly. But that summer night in 1999, it all fell apart. Coming home from a horse show, he called her name, heard nothing, and walked out into the backyard. She was lying face down in the pool. The paramedics arrived. The autopsy showed she had been on alcohol and Valium. The tabloids blamed him. Anonymous letters kept coming. Some said it was negligence. Others whispered darker things. Shatner collapsed. He locked himself in his house for days. Later, he admitted that he had almost followed her, that he had stood at the edge of that pool more than once, staring into its stillness. He blamed himself, blamed his absence, blamed his reputation, blamed his inability to save her. Therapy came. Then he wrote. He published his memoirs, not to clear his name, but to survive the turmoil. Even as fans cheered for his next appearance, he carried her death like a mysterious burden beneath his Kirk uniform. In 2025, at age 94, William Shatner is still a living legend. With an estimated net worth of $100 million, he still writes, speaks, and reminds fans not to be fooled by online impersonators. In 2021, he became the oldest person to fly into space. A journey indeed, but perhaps never far enough to escape what he witnessed that night, in the light of the lake, when the legend stopped and the man was left behind. Aaron Eisenberg as Nog. Aaron Eisenberg was just 24 years old when he stepped into the role of Nog on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, a defiant, smooth-talking Ferengi who would become one of the series' most heroic characters. But the young actor behind the mask was living on borrowed time, his heart and kidneys failing. Born on January 6, 1969 in Hollywood, California, Aaron was born with a malformed kidney. His teenage years were spent not on red carpets, but in dialysis clinics and hospital beds. At age 14, he underwent his first kidney transplant. By 2015, decades later, the kidney had died. He could not afford another transplant. In desperation, he set up a GoFundMe page. The man who once roamed the halls of Starfleet now waited by the phone for failed donor calls, hooked up to machines, living minute by minute. One night, just months before his second transplant, he collapsed in the bathroom. Alone, gasping for air, he trudged to the phone and called his fiancée, whispering, "I don't know if I'm going to make it." She arrived before the ambulance did. It was in that moment, battered and gasping on the tile floor, that Aaron realized his body would never forgive him for having survived this long. The transplant came, but it was too late to repair the damage done over the years. His heart, already strained, began to fail. Still, he appeared on podcasts, conventions, and fan meetings, telling jokes through the pain. He never told most people how bad things got. Aaron Eisenberg died of heart failure on September 21, 2019, at the age of 50. His net worth was just $1 million, but his value to the Star Trek community was immeasurable. To fans, he's more than Nog. He's proof that even the smallest characters on screen can take on the toughest battles and still smile. George Takei as Hikaru Sulu. George Takei was 45 when he returned as Hikaru Sulu in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, confident at the helm, unflinching in the face of adversity. But long before he became a space pilot, he was locked behind barbed wire, staring out at freedom through the slats of a government-issued barracks window, wondering why America had turned its back on his family. Born April 20th, 1937 in Los Angeles, Takei was just 5 years old when he and his family were forced into the Raware concentration camp during World War II. Every night, he heard his mother crying softly under the covers, pretending to be asleep. His father, a once proud businessman, now swept the dust off the floor of a run-down cafeteria. The shame never left him. He rarely spoke publicly about the concentration camps until later. But there was one moment, never shown on camera, that defined his silence. The day his brother asked, "Are we bad people, George?" And he couldn't answer. That unanswered question followed him to Hollywood, where casting directors offered him roles as waiters, villains, or voiceless extras. He accepted because he had no other choice. When Star Trek came out, he felt like he had just had a breakthrough, but even then, he knew Sulu was underwritten. He pushed harder, fought for scenes, and clashed quietly with William Shatner, who often stole the spotlight. Off-screen, he kept an even heavier secret. He was gay, working in an industry where being gay meant career suicide. A studio executive once warned him that if they found out, he would be finished. In the 2010s, rumors circulated that Teay was secretly undergoing treatment for cancer, believed to be prostate-related. But he never missed a panel or public appearance. He still jokes, poses, smiles. But behind closed doors, those close to him say there are nights when he can't walk without help. He doesn't let his illness keep him silent, not after surviving captivity, not after being in hiding for half his life. As of 2025, George Takei is 88 years old. His net worth is estimated at $14 million. But his real wealth lies in his voice, still loud, still clear. From protest marches to memoirs, from Broadway to Twitter, he remains undaunted. For a boy who was once locked up in a desert camp, every word he says now carries the weight of all the things he was not allowed to say. Patrick Stewart as Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Patrick Stewart was 47 when he first stepped onto the bridge of the USS Enterprise as Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Stoic, articulate, a beacon of reason in a chaotic universe. But years before he donned his Starfleet uniform, he had been hiding in a kitchen cupboard, a trembling boy listening to his father beat his mother just a few feet away, praying that the door would silence her screams. Born on July 13, 1940, in Mirfield, Yorkshire, England, Stewart's childhood was a struggle for survival. His father, a decorated veteran of the Wubu-2, returned from the war broken, erratic, alcoholic, and abusive. For many years, Patrick remained silent. He smiled for his yearbook photos, read Shakespeare under his covers, and built an inner world where words could shield him from the blows. But the pain still seeped into his bones, into his silence, into his shame. When Star Trek: The Next Generation catapulted him to stardom, he was still healing. One night in the late 1990s, while performing King Lear in London, he collapsed in his dressing room after the curtain closed, his hands shaking uncontrollably. His assistant found him sitting on the floor, muttering lines not from the play but from Star Trek, over and over again. He later confessed to friends that playing King Lear had opened up old wounds. Too much control, too much rage, too familiar. That same year, he quietly underwent treatment for early-stage prostate cancer while continuing to work without telling the cast. After 2 divorces and an internal struggle with his self-esteem, he gradually became dependent on alcohol to numb the noise in his head. Friends say he once came to a rehearsal drunk and cried for an hour, muttering, I'm not who they think I am. That breakdown led him to therapy and then to activism. His work with survivors of domestic violence is not charity. It is penance, remembrance, and unfinished grief. As of 2025, Patrick Stewart is 85 years old. Now retired, he lives quietly with his third wife, Sunny Ozell, in England. His estimated net worth is $25 million, much of which he donates to mental health and veterans charities. Although millions see him as the calm captain of the future, his true heroic quality was surviving a war zone in his childhood and never letting it shape his final actions.